Good to go? Okay, you can hear us? Okay. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to part two of Samar Ali. We have her back at Woodmont, so welcome if you're in the chapel. Welcome if you were on the live stream. It's been 7 weeks since Russia invaded Ukraine, and then 6 weeks since we first had Dr. Ali here. And so a lot of folks have said, let's bring her back, let's get an update, and that's what we're going to do tonight. So welcome back. Let me say just a short prayer, and we will begin the dialogue tonight. Loving God, we look around the world, and we see a lot of innocent people suffering, refugees that are struggling, and we pray for all of them. Tonight, we welcome Dr. Ali back to give us clarity on what's happening, what's going on, what we can do. We also lift up Steve and Deb, who are in that region helping take care of refugees. All this we pray in Christ's name. Amen. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back. Hi, everyone.
You got back last night from Harvard, and you were at the World Economic Forum.
Yeah.
And so I thought I might ask you about that and let you kind of give us an update on how you became a part of that and what that is and what you guys were talking about.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a young global leader with the World Economic Forum, and we had a convening with about 40 countries, 60 representatives, 10 from the United States, talking about global policy for the 21st century. And it was really interesting. I was there for about 10 days, and China was there, US was there, representatives from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Germany, France, the UK, etc., Australia, and other parts of the world. And it what's interesting was one of the things that was so interesting for me was what we had in common, and also a lot of conversations around whether or not democracy or authoritarianism were, which one was the better form of governance. And this palpable conversation between democracies and authoritarian countries, and this debate really between the two of us. And one of the things I learned from one of the Harvard professors that spoke to us was that, in their opinion, democracy has been waning for the past 16 years. I did not realize that they had put a 16-year marker on that. So really, for the first time in my career, there was a lot of discussion as to whether or not democracy was the way forward. That's the first time I've ever been at such a global forum of where that has been on the table, because it has always been for me that it has been accepted that democracy was the norm. And so one of the representatives from Germany and another from Finland told me that, in Australia as well, that, for example, they were interested in following millions of conversations and maybe implementing millions of conversations in their own country, and were studying what we were doing here to preserve democracy, and we're wanting to learn from that, and we're also making statements such as wanting to make sure that we worked together. And so again, it feels as if we're entering into a new global chapter.
So was this based on observation around the globe and what's happening and what's going on, or was it just a more academic conversation about democracy versus authoritarianism? How did
No, it's definitely the former. It's definitely the former. So the people that were, the young global leaders that were there were ministers, members of parliament, political officials, representatives of NGOs, people with the United Nations, and also people who represent the economists, who work with the economists and news services, along with people who head up banks, who represents financial institutions and funds.
Okay. Well, let's bring it back to the Ukraine and
Yes.
Russia. We really enjoyed having you here about a month and a half ago. And
I wish it was for other circumstances.
Well, we do too, but your insight has been much appreciated. And so I'd love for you just to kind of talk to us. We've all been watching the news and reading the newspapers, but where do things stand right now, 7 weeks into this war? What has changed? What's still the same? What's your perspective on where things are right now?
Well, what's still the same is that we need an end game. And in that we really need to focus on de-escalating the conflict. I think that what I said, I was reflecting on that several weeks ago, remains the same in terms of what we need in order for this conflict to end. And war is not, I'm not saying anything that people don't know. War is horrific. It's the worst. I mean, for example, and I'm going to say something that I haven't been able to shake from what I heard this morning, and that's you know that what you don't know, but maybe you do know, but somebody under the age of 3 years old was raped yesterday in the Ukraine. And in wartime, you see people absolutely at their worst, and we call these authorizing environments for cruelty. We see barbarism. We see people acting barbaric. And so to see innocent civilians going through that brings my heart so much pain and ache. And that's why I continue to say the sooner and the faster we can end this violence, the better. We need to get to an end game. The best way we're going to get there is, unfortunately, through sanctions. We know this. This is why we continue to say, and we hear confirmation, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, that full-on sanctions are what are going to end this war as soon as possible for a variety of reasons. And that's why we need everybody on deck as our allies to enforce those sanctions. I will also say those sanctions come at a price. They come at a price to Americans. They come at a price to Europeans right now. They come we know that when we're filling up gas. And they're also coming at a price to Russians and to Russian people. And what's going to happen are that our hope is that there's going to be enough pressure placed on the Russian people to and Putin to call for an end to this war and to push him to the negotiation table in a way of where the Ukrainians and Zelensky get the best deal possible.
So do you think that Vladimir Putin expected the global response that he has received? And the second part of that question is, do you think he cares what the global response is?
I think he has to care. I don't think he can afford not to care. I think some people would disagree with me about that, but that's what I think, and I could be wrong, but that's what I think. And then I do think he was surprised. I do think that I do think there were some miscalculations on his part with regards to how swiftly he thought that the U.S. and its allies and our allies would respond and react. I will say, I don't know if you're going to ask me this question about the people who haven't sanctioned. Are we going to get into the countries that haven't sanctioned him? Because I think that's important too.
I think we should. So there are countries that haven't sanctioned him, many of which are surprising.
Yeah, so I don't think it's a surprise to us that China has not sanctioned Russia. I think what it has caught some people by surprise, and I've received some questions about the fact that the UAE has not sanctioned him, and Saudi Arabia has not sanctioned him. And while Qatar voted to condemn him, there's been 3 UN resolutions at this point. While Qatar has condemned him and voted yes on the resolution to condemn Putin, while the UAE and Saudi Arabia did not, they have not signed on to full-on sanctions, and neither has Israel. Israel hasn't signed on to full-on sanctions. And so the U.S. is pressuring Israel right now, in particular, as a U.S. ally, to sanction Russia. Now, they have signed on to some sanctions, but not all sanctions. And the UAE is becoming, there was an article that came out just 2 days ago, is becoming a real estate haven for Russian oligarchs. And so we really are seeing, we really are needing to have a conversation right now about what this means for democracy. So we're being asked to sanction, for example, Iran, and we're being, but we're not, and we're signing on to those sanctions as we have, because we also have been, because it's important for those countries which I mentioned for us to do so, and now we're saying it's important to sanction Russia, and we're not getting the same backing. And so I do think that we have to ask ourselves a question, which is, what does this mean for America? What does this mean for our foreign policy? What does this mean for democracy?
Well, and what does it say if America is pressuring some of these countries to put sanctions in place and they don't do it, how do we read that? How do we respond to that? What does that mean for our influence in the world?
Well, it's a conversation. And I think that where we are now doesn't mean that's where we have to be in 2 years' time. So I think that this is a check for where we are. This is giving us data and information for us to, we are still and remain the most powerful economy in the world. We still are the superpower. And we still are very much admired, in my opinion. I mean, for example, people were at Harvard. The world came to Harvard. Harvard is in Boston, Massachusetts, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is in the United States. And so I think that, we don't need to be arrogant. And I think that we as Americans, we need to always anchor ourselves in humility, but also in facts. And the world still does admire us and still looks to us for leadership. And I think that we need to think about, what does leading in this moment look like now? What does it look like in the next 2 years? And what does it look like over the next 10 years? And my bet is still on America. And that we can demonstrate a pathway of where people, and I think that still authoritarian regimes do to a certain extent depend on their business community and their people trusting them, of the people wanting to see U.S. leadership prevail.
So say a little more about that as it pertains to this argument over democracy versus authoritarianism. What role, and it's an important one, will the U.S. continue to play as we move into the future? And as you say, many people are becoming more pessimistic on the future of democracies in general.
Yeah, well, I think that first off, I think we have to really strengthen what it means to be the meaning of what it means to be an ally. I think we need to define what that looks like and what that means. And so if you're going to be considered an ally, and Senator Corker has spoken to this several times over the past couple of years, and I think he's right about that, of where he has said, what does it mean to be a U.S. ally? And for us to be thoughtful about how we even use that term. I think that's one. I think two, I think there's an art to diplomacy, and there's also a specificity to it. And so we need to be able to not only be transactional in our diplomatic engagements, but we need to be strategic. And so what do deals look like that we have with other countries? We tend to be rather generous, in my opinion. And I think that we should say very specific, and I think Congress has a role to play in this too. So there's the executive branch, and then there's our legislative branch. And oftentimes what we see and what we've seen in modern day warfare over the past 15 years are the heartstrings of Congress are pulled on publicly differently than that in the executive branch. And I think the legislative branch and the executive branch don't need to have wedges driven between them by non-U.S. entities. I really do believe that. I think that U.S. foreign policy should be U.S. foreign policy. And I think it should be decided by the American people without interference. I'm seeing a lot of interference. And I also think we need to tighten our FARA regulations. We need to get out of the gray area. FARA stands for the Foreign Registration Act, Foreign Agent Registration Act. So for people who are U.S. citizens acting as foreign agents, it's a gray area of the law. I think we need to make it more black and white. I'm sorry, I'm getting technical here. So I'll back out of that.
That's why we like having you here.
Sorry, I apologize.
So let me bring this back to Vladimir Putin, and I've heard this, you've heard this, I think everybody has. He's been a respected, even though people are skeptical of him, leader on the global stage, it seems like until now. And now he's going to go down in history as a war criminal because of the way this is playing out. He's not a good guy, but does he not care about his legacy, or what does he want his legacy to be?
Well, unfortunately, we have to ask the question, who's defining his legacy and who does he care about that defines his legacy? And I think we have to look at not to pick on the UAE, but I do think we have to look at how the world is responding to Bashar al-Assad. So the UAE just hosted Syria's president, Bashar al-Assad, in Dubai, in the UAE, and he's a war criminal. He chemically gassed his own people, and he just was hosted in the past few weeks by the United Arab Emirates. Putin's watching that. What does that say to Putin?
It seems like there's kind of been another recalculation very recently by Russia, and there's a focus on the eastern part of Ukraine. Can we get the map to come up? Are you working on that right now?
And while you're doing that, I'll just say this, because you asked me what changed. And I think it's important to recognize that 11 million Ukrainians have left their homes since we met last. 11 million, that's 20% of the population. Imagine if 20% of Americans in 6 weeks' time left their homes. That would be talking about 65 million plus people in America. I mean, that's the size. So 11 million people.
And where are they
4
going?
million of which have left the country. Like somebody who was at the meeting, for example, just adopted a Ukrainian family. She's German, and she was talking to me about that. She's like, she now has 5 Ukrainians living in her home. And she lives in a village outside Berlin. And 7 million have gone from parts of Ukraine to other parts of Ukraine, for example, from eastern Ukraine to western Ukraine, which is a trend we also saw in Syria. So this is one of the worst refugee crises in the past 100 years.
And so how many have left the country again? You said
11 million. Well, 4.5 million have left the country.
Have left the country. 11 million have been driven from their
Yeah.
home. So how are the surrounding countries handling this? We actually have our mission coordinator and his wife
Really?
over there, Steve and Deb.
Wow.
And they went to basically help and to see what
Wow.
they could do to help. And so we're getting updates from them. But how are all the countries around the region? And how are other countries like the United States going to help? And what role can we play in welcoming these people that did not choose to get run out of their homeland?
Well, I'll say very sadly, we have had experience with this recently with Syrian refugees and with Afghan refugees, both in the United States and in Europe. So I've been a part of for the past 10 years of meetings talking about the migration crisis. And countries have looked to see how they can better work with refugees and best practices for resettling refugees temporarily and then permanently. And so they have reformed their systems for people who are coming into their countries as refugees. And so you'll talk to people who are focused on resettling refugees, and they'll say, we learned these lessons from Syria. And the United States has most recently experienced it with Afghan refugees in August of 2021. And so I think, and I could be wrong, I think we've said we're letting in 100,000. I could be wrong on that number, but that's the number that's in my memory bank. I think we've said 100,000. We're going to help resettle 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. We will probably get some in Nashville. We are a center for refugees immigrating to the United States. And so I think the best thing that we can do is have empathy, I think, and to open the church doors and to open our doors in our homes, and to, the first few months whenever somebody immigrates, I think especially in situations like this, can be traumatic. And so just even giving a listening ear, and giving a sense of place and purpose, very quickly thinking about jobs and how they're going to settle in and how they're going to become a part of the community.
So when you were here last, and I echo all of that, I think that's really important, and our church is trying to do its part. When you were here last, we talked about Kyiv, and I said that I thought Kyiv would fall. I was wrong. You said you thought Kyiv wouldn't fall. It seems like, again, things are being shifted to the eastern part of Ukraine. Kyiv is still there. Zelensky and the armies have held strong. What is going on right now? What is Putin's new focus, given what's changed on the ground or what he hasn't been able to accomplish?
What I will say is Zelensky is definitely going down in history as a hero. The courage that man has shown has been just off the charts. I mean, he just is incredible. And his voice is powerful. I think that everybody is just in awe of Zelensky right now. And you can't help but stand back and just applaud. And so I think he definitely will go down as a hero. And I think that what we're seeing, sadly, again, I keep saying sadly, but what we're seeing is Putin is trying to, this is what's in play right now, is I think he is wanting to put Eastern Ukraine on the negotiation table. So the more he is able to put pressure on Mariupol, which is why what we're hearing is 10,000 people died in Mariupol over the past 24 hours. It's a horrible number. We should give a moment of silence for the people who passed. And it is becoming that southeastern city of Ukraine is becoming where we're seeing indiscriminate bombing by Russia. I think what he's trying to do is take enough territory in eastern Ukraine to put that on as part of what Zelensky has to cede if he wants there to be an end game. I'm hoping I'm wrong.
So basically, and looks like the software update is almost over, but it seems like everything he's focusing on the eastern part. So is your projection that there will be negotiations and peace talks and Ukraine will be remapped and Russia will get this part of the Ukraine? Is that what you're saying?
I think it's a possibility. I think that's what Putin wants. You're asking me why he's shifted over to the eastern side and away from Kyiv. I think because Kyiv didn't fall. He wasn't able to, again, he miscalculated, and he's trying to see how much he can take. Now, I don't know. We don't know, but I think that's why he's focused on eastern Ukraine.
Okay. So how do you see this playing out? This is April the 11th. This has been going on for 7 weeks.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of people killed, as you just said, innocent people, a lot of refugees. How do you see this playing out? When do these talks take place? How could they get to an agreement that would stop the fighting?
The sooner the better that we end this. I keep saying that. And because just for so many different factors. And so, again, what experts in this area are continuously saying, and economic experts, is that our best bet, given our current strategy and the one that we've taken, is for there to be for sanctions, full-on sanctions, and for our friends and allies to sign on to full-on sanctions to pressure Putin to the negotiating table. And remember what I said a couple weeks ago, the sooner and the faster that we put those into place, the better this is going to be. So that's why time is of the essence, because the longer this drags out, the more in favor that is for Putin.
Why do you say that?
Because he's able to continue indiscriminate bombings and to gain ground and to gain footing and to take territory that because he has more military power and might than Ukraine has. And we know this. And they're not a part of NATO. And we've made it fairly clear that we're not ready to go in ourselves and to set up a no-fly zone. There's not a military appetite for that. We can argue whether or not we should, but right now we haven't demonstrated that we have an appetite for that. So given what we have and what we're dealing with, that's where, yes.
But here's the problem.
Yeah.
I get it. You want it to go fast. The sanctions don't happen quickly. And they just don't.
Yeah, Dave's saying that the sanctions don't happen quickly. It takes time for those to play out.
There are already ways around the sanctions.
Yeah.
We won't even give them airplanes. I mean, we can at least give them airplanes.
We are.
Okay.
We are giving them. We've given over. We've given to date over $1 billion.
I know we give $1 billion.
Well, in military equipment that includes airplanes. And
Well,
so
and you would say that the reason that that Zelensky and the Ukraine has put up the fight it has is because of the money, the supplies, the weapons that are coming in from the West
and intelligence.
and intelligence.
But I would say these sanctions calculations are not just based on what I'm saying. I will say that these are coming from former economic advisors to Putin. So one of his most recent foreign economic advisors who's defected from him confirmed yesterday that if we have full-on sanctions, he thinks that Putin will come to the negotiation table within a month. So this isn't just what I think. This is what a former economic advisor to Vladimir Putin is saying.
So what about what happens if these countries that historically have been our allies, we can't convince them to get on board with the sanctions?
I think it prolongs the war. And that's why I'm saying it's coming down to negotiations. What are we saying to the United Arab Emirates? What are we saying to Saudi Arabia? What are we saying to Israel? Lincoln was just in Israel last week. What kinds of conversations are we having? Because we're providing a lot of military assistance and foreign aid and we're doing a lot of favors in the Middle East to a lot of different countries. What are we getting in return?
So it seems like the longer this goes on, the narrative has been from the beginning, we can't go in there because this guy has nuclear weapons. Does that change if we continue to watch the slaughter of tens of thousands of people? And at some point, whether it's the United States or a coalition of people from NATO, just say enough?
Yes.
Or is that still no, do not do that because then it's World War III?
Yes, I think that we cannot allow for the message to the world to be that the strong man slaughter approach is the new game in town. And so I think we do have to have a red line. But unlike what happened in Syria, I think that once a red line is drawn,
you have to enforce it.
You have to enforce it. We have to determine what that red line is. Now, we also have to this is complex. And I always hate it when people say this is complex because it feels like that's code for something. But I want to just unpack what I mean by saying this is complex. What's happening in France right now? Can someone tell me?
Macron's in a tough runoff.
With who? And what is Le Pen saying? Sorry? What else is she saying? What else is she saying? Sorry, I'm turning into professor. She's saying, sorry. So, sorry to do that. What she's saying is Macron is spending too much time on the phone trying to solve a conflict that's hundreds of miles away from France, instead of focusing on the needs of the local French citizens. He could lose his election over this. So what do you think he's thinking as a member of NATO? I don't know.
What?
She might be. I don't know.
What do you think he's thinking? That we really need NATO to step in and show that it's not okay with what's going on, and that all this hasn't been in vain, or what do you think he's thinking?
I think he might be thinking, how much time do I need to spend on this issue in the next month to 2 months?
Yeah. If my opponent is basically saying I'm neglecting the needs at home. What has surprised you in recent weeks? What hasn't surprised you in terms of what's happened, in terms of the Biden administration's response?
What has not surprised me, unfortunately, I've seen an erosion of positive norms through the Syrian conflict. I've seen Russia rewarded. I've seen I've seen our democratic norms waning and in bad behavior not held accountable, not just in Syria, but in other parts of the world. I've seen the messages that have been sent. And I've also seen that as a country, as a nation, as a superpower, and in my conversations globally, that people are confused as to U.S. foreign policy. And because we have ourselves been in conflict with what we think our foreign policy should be. And we arguably have been for the past 20 years. And I think people have taken advantage of that. And so because we haven't been speaking with one voice, and because we haven't been acting consistently in accordance with our own democratic values and norms, unfortunately, I think that, as they say, what is it, when the cat's away, the mice will play. And so I think what we're seeing is that negative norm setting cycle that I talked about that is continuing to spin in downward spirals towards violence. And the way we have to break that is through this positive norm setting cycle, which starts with unity, which actually the end goal there is unity, which is what we're working on at Vanderbilt on the Project on Unity and American Democracy. And we could call it Project on Unity and Democracy, really, and not just American democracy, but sets this example for why we think democracy is the best form of government. I think we have to demonstrate that. I think we can't just say it. I think we have to demonstrate it. We have to show why it is the choice for the 21st century, why it is the better choice for the 21st century. Yeah.
So I hear you coming back from Cambridge. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm picking up on a little bit of pessimism, frustration. Maybe you hadn't heard that kind of talk before, that, you know, that democracy may not be the future and that's not the gold standard that everybody wants, or are you just saying it's just difficult?
No, I think democracy is the gold standard.
Right.
I think democracy will prevail. I think it won't prevail by me just saying it. Right. I think that we have to demonstrate it. I think we have to continuously be demonstrating and why our democratic framework is the one to invest in.
But one of the problems with democracy, as you just said, and I'm all for democracy, by the way.
Yeah.
But every politician will run against the foreign policy of the previous one because that's good politics, and then we never do get a steady, consistent global voice because it's always changing.
That's the art of democracy, though. It's not up to the politicians to decide. It's up for us to decide. We decide who the politicians are going to be, and we hold them accountable. That's how a democracy works. And that's also what I mean by demonstration. I think that we are ceding way too much power to political figures. They come and go. We decide. That's not just wishful thinking. That's what democracy is. And so I think that I really believe we, the people of the United States of America, we, the people. And so I think we have to lean into that. And we need to set the tone. People I've worked for several politicians. I think there are people in this room who've worked for politicians as well. And we know that they all do care about elections. And suddenly, when elections come around, there's an uptick in those town hall meetings. There's an uptick in those flights to different parts of the state because they need the votes. If we get ourselves organized around a couple of key issues that we want to communicate that we care about, their tune will change.
So give us specific examples of what those issues would be, because I'm having a hard time following you. We the people is great. The people also seems to be the problem, because we the people have many different ideas about what the U.S. should be doing on the global stage.
It's a great question. I think that we need to, for example, ask questions about businesses being headquartered in the United States. I mean, that example. I think we need to talk about how much of our goods are made in China. I think we need to talk about how much of our debt is owned by China. I think we need to start asking those specific questions and what the plan is and what their plan is to protect U.S. interests globally in relationship with China. I think we also need to ask such questions as, what is our plan for holding our allies to respecting what we are asking them to adhere to, that support U.S. interests internationally. And of where we say, when it's time to sign on to full-on sanctions, are you with us or are you against us? And I think making some, just like those clear messages in asking someone to answer that, along with saying, I think this is a very important piece to this, about our rhetoric about each other and how we talk about each other. Let's start there. We know that negative norm-setting cycle that I talk about starts with demonizing the other. And we know that politicians are buying into this friend versus enemy framework here at home. I think our first ask should be, please stop setting us up internally as friends versus enemies. Let's start there. Because it's very hard for us. That message will resonate, by the way, in very specific ways, depending on which politician you're talking to say, please don't talk about Republicans as the enemy. Or please stop talking about Democrats as the enemy. We don't see them as the enemy. They're our neighbors.
Yeah, and that is a big part of what the Project on Unity American Democracy, millions of conversations, that's what we certainly want this church to be, is a place where people come together civilly, who vote differently, and have conversations and still realize we're all Americans, and but it's become a real challenge. There was an interesting piece that Jonathan Haidt put out today in The Atlantic talking about basically the 2010s in America. He called it after Babel, that social media has ushered in this chaotic age of multiple truths and skepticism and canceling, and it's really just been chaos. And so social media has helped get us to the place where we are today. And so the question then is, how do we get out of it? And it has to start with our leaders, but it's a complicated question.
It won't start with, the thing is though, it will not, the way democracies work, it will not start with our leaders. It is, I think we are setting ourselves up for failure if we continue to say, I wish our leaders would lead. Our leaders will lead when we hold them to doing that. It's just how it works, whether we like it or not. And this is not rocket science. And it's just the way that our electoral process works. Think about the billions of dollars that are pumped into figuring out what voters want around election time. Look at it. Look at it. Why? Why are people so curious to know what you think and what you want? And are trying to reach you with messages? Maybe because they care. Why do they care? It's like those types of things that it actually does matter. Just so leaders are going to stop demonizing each other when we say stop. When we keep rewarding it, they're going to just crank it up. And I will say this, because they say it's zero sum. It's a zero-sum game. And so I think that we have to be also, be honest with ourselves. How did radio change politics? And how did TV change politics? Social media is not different than that. And so social media has, of course, changed the way we communicate. We don't need to have a breakdown about it. We need to solve it. And the way we solve it is not by censoring it, in my opinion. It's by really being thoughtful about, okay, there's a new platform of how we communicate, of how we engage, of how we get messages across. How do we do that in effective ways that benefit us societally? I think that's the question for us.
But one of the biggest problems is not the censorship, it's the false information that is presented as facts.
And we've had that with TV.
And people don't know where to go to find out, what is happening, what is going on.
And that's what we're working on, the information marketplace. And so people are not stupid. And so again, I really do not think people are stupid. And I think that's another thing to think of, like, people are just dumb. No, people are smart. People actually are rational, in many ways are rational actors, and will figure things out if you give them the tools to do it. And I think what we're trying to figure out right now are the mechanisms to decipher truth from fiction. And that's what we're trying to do right now. And I think, like, in terms of communicating in 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, it's not like people are like, I want to believe lies. I'm looking for the lies. People are actually searching for the truth. I think the majority of people are searching for the truth. And the truth not so much as facts, and truth based on facts. And so how do we get the facts to people? I don't think we've figured that out yet. And I think that's the question for this decade. And there are a lot of people working on this problem right now.
Yeah. So you don't have a crystal ball, but in terms of the Ukraine crisis, do you want to make a prediction of how you see this playing out? And then I want to save time for questions tonight. But
Predictions are dangerous.
Yeah, you don't know. Just like you said last time, we hope that we can bring this to a peaceful negotiation sooner rather than later. But we've got serious challenges if the countries you listed are not getting on board with the sanctions.
Right. So my prediction is based on where Putin is focusing right now, that this will not expand beyond Ukraine. I think that it will stay inside Ukraine, and I think that we owe a lot to the Ukrainian people for fighting this battle on behalf of democracy.
How many Ukrainian casualties, we don't know exactly, but do we guess? And then how many on the Russian side since this started?
I would have to look. Okay. I don't know off the top of my head.
Especially if what you just said a few minutes ago is true and tens of thousands, then that's a huge number.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Jay, come on down if you could with the microphone. And Jay's also online, so if you're watching the live stream, again, great to have Samar Ali back with us. Let's go ahead and ask a few questions. Roy.
Good. I've been wanting to ask questions all through this, but I didn't know we were allowed to talk. Number one, Zelensky says he's not going to give up any territory. So when you talk about that's how Putin will get out of it, I mean,
that's what he's trying for. That's what Putin's trying to do.
But my question really kind of goes back to your beginning when you're talking about this conference you came from.
Yes, sir.
About democracy. And you, if I understood, you said for 16 years democracy or democracies have been waning in the world.
They said democracy.
Okay. And so one question is, you've mentioned some ways, what are some of the ways in which you see that happening? And then my next question is the debate, you say, between democracy versus authoritarian governments. I'd love to know what some of the key points are in that debate. Yeah,
so some of the debates are that authoritarian governments were saying is that they're more efficient. And so they're able to, like, look at America, they're all at each other's throats. And
not as much internal chaos.
Right. And look at how COVID's managed, and look at how many deaths
we managed COVID great here. It was perfect.
Have resulted.
In churches, and schools, everything.
So people are saying, like, look at our social media, look at the social media problems, look at the problems resulting from fake news. Just regulate, like, just shut down free speech and you won't have these problems. It'd be much more, like, this is what they're saying, it'll be much more efficient. You won't have cities burning. You won't have people there'll be consequences for people destroying property. Look at their elections, they're a hoax. Like, they're all at each other's throats. Their quality of life is declining. They don't have access to health care. If you don't have money and you don't have resources, you're left out. And you die sooner, you die quicker. Like, these are the things that are being said.
But our authoritarian governments depends on who's the authority as to whether it's for the good of the people or not.
I'm with you. They'll say we're for the people. So that's the thing, is they'll say, like, look, we provide for our citizens. We give them medical care and medical treatment when they need it. We don't price them out. And so we're swift, like we protect our borders. We have laws that are enforced and that are enforceable, and that people know there are consequences if they break them. And so this is the argument, to answer your question. I'm not saying again, my home initially was learning human rights and human rights law. And so I think it's impossible to protect human rights effectively under authoritarianism.
Can democracies continue to thrive if authoritarian governments are on the rise around the globe?
Yes, I think we absolutely can, but we've got to get to work. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say, is that we can't, and responsibility is something that comes to mind too. I mean, when I read Tom Brokaw's book on the Greatest Generation, one of the first things that really touches me is that sense of responsibility. And I think we have to have ownership and a share of responsibility, and not sort of like it's our leader's job, it's our politician's job. Well, it's all of our job. And what does that mean, and what does that look like, what we put into practice every day, including how we talk about each other, because people are listening, people are watching. If we look like we can't stand each other, and that we ourselves are just in a civil war effectively, and we can't govern with one voice on any issue to save our lives, literally, people are watching.
Jay?
One of our online viewers, and says that as an act of aggression, if we were to have a negotiated settlement and eastern Ukraine were to be ceded over to Russia, would a no-fly zone over Ukraine by NATO be seen then as an act of aggression by Russia, thus leading to more loss of life and more violence and war?
From the military experts that I've spoken to, U.S. military experts, and I've asked them that question, they have said yes. I'm not a military expert, so I'm just going off of what they have explained to me. And there might be some military experts in the room that could shed more light on that. But
A lot of people think setting up a no-fly zone, whether now or then, is basically just a prelude into you're going to be called in. And
Right.
so that's why they don't agree to it.
right.
All right. Got a question over here. Jay, Archie, hold the microphone if you could, so we can hear it.
I just have a quick comment. You're talking about Putin's legacy. My personal conviction is that he is trying to restore and/or reestablish a certain part of the old Soviet republic. That would be the legacy that he would want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
I truly believe that, above and beyond anything else.
I personally think you're right. I do.
I want to see if you agree.
I do agree.
And then also, you've been talking about democracy here in the U.S. Number one, we have to clean up our own house. We have to display that to our other parts of the world, because they look at the U.S. as democracy, as the leaders of the world.
Exactly, and we know this, and they're telling us this. I mean, we are being told this directly from New Zealand, from Germany, from France, from the UK, everybody, from South Africa. I mean, that message is coming in loud and clear. And I also agree. Have you read In First Person, which is Putin's autobiography? It's a short read. I highly recommend you read it.
After you finish Matthew's Gospel, get that book.
Because he's basically saying that in his own words.
Okay, Jay.
From Ann Mitchell, she says she understands that Russia is able to generate $850 million a day in revenue. So the sanctions do not appear to be working. How do you feel about that?
That goes back to the question that the gentleman in the back was saying as well. I think it's going to be impossible. I think it's going to be very difficult for these sanctions to work if we don't have all of our allies signed on to full-on sanctions.
But most of that's the black oil market.
And that's what I'm talking about.
So can you say a little more about why these countries in your opinion, have not signed on?
Because it's not in
economic
their
interest.
interests, because it's not in their economic interests, and they don't want to bear the burden. And-
Specifically as it relates to energy.
Right.
They don't have enough general respect for the United States anymore that they care.
Exactly.
So one of the things that, go ahead, sorry.
Exactly.
One of the things, you said it doesn't start with the leader, it starts with the people, but one of the first steps in America is we cannot, Democrat or Republican, we've got to stop electing leaders that divide us intentionally.
We have to do that. That's number one, because we have to stop rewarding it. It's advantageous. It's become advantageous. And I think that there are different ways in which we can do that, not only at the ballot box. And that's where I was talking about with regards to the FARA regulations. I think that we need to get out of the gray area around FARA. And we need to be, I'm shocked by the amount of lobbying that goes on behalf of foreign agents and foreign countries and lobbyists. I mean, lobbyists in the United States representing foreign interest in Congress. It's out of control. It's out of control. It doesn't make sense to our interests. And so I can go on for hours about that. And so I just really think that we're operating as a nation state in a world that's organized as nation states. And if we have 50 different lobbyists lobbying for different countries' interests in our halls of Congress, how is that possible? And they're receiving millions of dollars. And we know this. I just don't think that that's in our interests.
No. All right.
As you talk about parties, political parties demonizing the other side, when did that begin? Do we ever see that ever being something that we can stop as a country?
We absolutely can stop it. And I think that's the beauty of our First Amendment. So a lot of people are worried about our First Amendment enabling cancel culture, but I think we should also look on problems and looked at as opportunities. And so I think with that is that the First Amendment allows for us to build consensus amongst each other to really push momentum in a particular direction. And I think that we need to put our weight into de-enemy each other. And so by humanizing each other. And that starts with talking about each other differently when we disagree with each other. I can't tell you the amount of pressure I get to demonize people who voted a particular way. At dinner parties, in gatherings, as a mediator, I feel it. I'm sensitive to that. And so my radar goes up, my antenna goes up whenever someone's trying to get me to demonize another person. I just instinctively feel it. And I feel it all over the place, even with the text messages I get. Because of the work I do, I'm on everybody's list. And so I get Republicans texting me and I get Democrats texting me. And it's this warlike language. And I'm like, do we really have to go there? Because I don't think that we have to go there in order to win an election. And I think that we have to move away from deadly competition, tribal-like competition, to friendly competition. And
I'll put a plug in for two books that I think spell this out well. Bill Haslam's book, Faithful
Yes.
Presence, is phenomenal, former governor.
Yes.
And Arthur Brooks's book, Love Your Enemies, is also very good at how we can begin to try to stop this.
yes, which
it's a big
Archbishop
problem.
Tutu preached on a lot of love my enemies. But I think when it started, I think that it has intensified. It's taken a turn over the past 10 years. I actually think many people will say the 2016 election. I think it started before then. Actually, I think it started arguably in 2011. And I think we saw and we learned this, I was in this meeting from another Harvard professor that was saying, I'm blanking on the name, that we saw a serious uptick in 2014. And there's a lot of people trying to analyze what was happening in 2014 as to why that was the case.
Other questions from those of you that are here tonight? Dave?
Yeah, I was just going to say, back to Ukraine, just assuming that the allies don't get on board and your sanctions don't roll in like you want them to, what's the end game? Because that's just indiscriminate loss of life and bombing and war.
Yeah.
And we, NATO, nobody's going to say, let's go, we need to go fix this yet.
Right.
So my question is, how does that end? And two, do you think there's a chance that NATO will be involved?
I would never say never. So I think there's always a chance, and and so there's always a chance. I would say that part of the question is, what does a win for Putin look like? And is the fact that he's moving towards focusing on the eastern part of Ukraine and is no longer as focused on Kyiv is an indication as to what an end game looks like to him.
Do you think it ever occurred to him that he couldn't take Kyiv?
Well, the for Zelensky is going to be, I hate to say this, but it's going to be loss of life. So, I mean, no, well, so this is that's where the negotiations would come in. And so what will happen is a Band-Aid. And we've seen this in other countries too, not just in Ukraine, Russia. We've seen this in other countries of where someone has gone in and there's been a loss of life that's reached a certain point of where, even though they fear that the country, that they will be invaded again, they want to ceasefire. They want it to stop now. They want to break in the fight. They want to break in the death tolls.
And so that's what would make Zelensky just say, take the eastern part, enough of my people have been killed.
And that's what we want to avoid, because for so many reasons we want to avoid that scenario. But to answer your question directly, that's how I would see that.
Hold on, Archie. Let me go to George really quick, because I want to get George Keith.
Do you think the Russian public understands the concept of a free press? And is there any chance that the Russian public will really understand what's going on right now in Ukraine and have some sympathy for what's going on?
I think some of them do. I mean, we've seen a number of captured Russian military officers speaking to this and trying to get the message out. Of that, many of them saying, we didn't know when we were going into the Ukraine, we didn't know that this is what we were doing. And so they started speaking out and saying they were saying we're not speaking under duress. Mm-hmm. We're speaking from the heart and literally breaking down. And so those are people in Ukraine. They're obviously going to be communicating to their families when this is hopefully over. And I think that we will see. Again, I hate to keep continuously saying we will see, but I want to be honest because I don't think we know yet. But I would say that what we do know to date is that the majority of people living inside Russia are trusting Putin. Now,
and again, what's his narrative to his people? We are fighting a Nazi regime in Ukraine. We are liberating the Ukrainian people from an awful government there. Isn't that what
That's part of it, but it's also we're protecting our border. Using simplistic language like that is our border. They're aggressing us on our western border. We need to protect our border. And also, there's been a lot of Western meddling in Ukraine to try to aggress us, and we have to defend ourselves. And Ukraine is trying to join NATO. We wanted to join NATO. We weren't accepted. Our membership request was denied. And we know about Article 5. And Ukraine is supposed to be, in their opinion, in his opinion, this is what he's saying, a neutral buffer zone for us. And that's no longer being the case. And we have to get ahead of it.
You haven't said much tonight about China.
Yeah,
And I know that
yeah.
there was probably a lot of talk about China at Harvard.
Yeah.
And then I want to come back to Jay, or come back to another question, but can you say a few words about China's still watching? What do you think
Well, I don't think
China's
just watching, I think they're engaging, and I really want to hear what Archie has to say too, because I found his comments on some of the reflections to be quite insightful. Not everybody's has been too, but like you had a specific comment to Dave or David's, is it Dave or David?
Dave.
Dave's
David.
remark.
All right,
So-
Archie, what were you going to say? Then I'm going to go to Big Dave Malone. Okay, okay. Okay, come back to you though. All right, Dave.
Just a quick question. NATO was formed, after World War II for protection of Western Europe. And now I think I read that Finland and Sweden want to become members of NATO. And obviously that's not going to be positive with Putin, particularly with Finland. Do you think they will become members of NATO? And has this conflict shown any strength or weakness of NATO?
It's a really great question. I think many people would say it's shown weakness. So there's that. And with regards to Sweden, I think there's a high likelihood. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think there is a high likelihood.
But they will join.
Yes. Yeah. But I think a lot of people are scratching their heads and saying, what is NATO's role in the 21st century?
All right, we got a couple, go ahead, Dave.
It would seem that NATO now, whatever their charter is, protection of Western Europe, their role ought to be stronger right now than it has been over the last 50 years.
Right.
All right, Robin, and then I promised her a hard stop just at 7, so we got to let this one
want me to
be the
stop?
last.
Oh, okay. Okay, my question is getting back to China. Okay, so
Yeah.
we have a debt with China. So they're paying, I mean, we're paying on that debt a percentage. As inflation occurs, how are we going to be able to pay on that debt? And will China call us on that debt? What do you think?
I think they could. This is an area I'm getting smarter on, as I'm not an economist. And so as an instance like this is why I believe in interdisciplinary approaches to analyzing and problem solving. Truly, seriously, in every sense of the word, know thy strengths, know thy area of understandings, and pull from others. And so this would be one of those instances where I will do that. My guess would be we are vulnerable, and we are opening ourselves up to them, as you say, calling us on that. On China, you know, they are, they believe this is their century. They can believe that. That doesn't mean that it is. And so, but, you know, they were quiet for a while, and now we've seen that they are coming to Putin's aid, and they are seen as an ally of Russia. What does that mean for us? And have we determined what that means for us? And I don't think that any of these present black and white answers. And I think like what it means is we have to decide, and I don't think we've decided this yet, but we need to decide it sooner rather than later as one country. What do we want our relationship with China to be? What is the best case scenario for us? And maybe that's a topic for next time, along with Farah.
Yeah, okay. I think let's thank Samar
Thank
Lee for
you.
coming back. And we may have
so
to do it.
much.
We may have to do a part 3.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Everybody that's online, thanks for joining
you.
us. Have a great night.
I'm
Go in
sorry I
peace.
had this hard stop. I'm fasting for Ramadan. That's why. So.